On behalf of the Executive Board of Erasmus University Rotterdam and Rotterdam School of Management, I would like to give you a warm welcome. My name is Annelien Bredenoord, I'm Rector Magnificus. Welcome, of course, to the Shareholder, Professor Tine De Moor, your husband and daughter, Hans and Kaat, your mother, sister, family, friends, colleagues, and students. I feel honored to be here today and to speak briefly at this inaugural lecture of Professor Tine De Moor. I will start with a disclosure. Tine and I know each other. 9 years ago, we were installed together with 8 other lucky academics as fresh new members of the Young Academy of the KNW, the Royal Dutch Society for Arts and Sciences. We both became professor at Utrecht University, and now we are here both at Erasmus University. And I think we both made a fantastic choice, and I'm also glad that you are here. I'm deeply impressed by your work. Started in Antwerp and Ghent, your dissertation, and it's quite a long title, For the Profit of the Commonality, Use, Uses and Management of Commons in the Sandy area of Flanders, 18th and 19th century, in 2003. A subject and field where your heart is evidently in, also showed by the tour you gave last May for many interested people through the Gemeene en Lowijden. We could not find a translation for that. In December 2012, you were appointed Professor of Institutions for Collective Action in Historical Perspective at the Faculty of Humanities, Department of History and Art History at Utrecht University, a position that you held until your transfer to RSM in 2020 and your appointment as Professor of Social Enterprise and Institutions for Collective Action. And your entire team, by then, from Utrecht, transferred with you to Rotterdam. Co-founder of the peer-reviewed International Journal of the Commons, former member of the Young Academy of Europe, and, as I already said, also a former member of the Young Academy of the KNW. Your chair aligns fully with the Erasmian values and our goal to make a positive societal impact together. Inspired by the ideas of our namesake, we give shape to our identity, our thinking and our actions. Socially engaged, world citizen, connecting, enterprising and open-minded. And I know you are very much aware of the added value of positive societal impacts, also, or rightly so, as a university. Many of the lectures that you give and panels that you participate in are aimed at a wider audience, mostly on societal issues. During a trade mission of King Willem-Alexander and Queen Maxima to Rhineland and Saarland, you gave a lecture on the cooperative idea today. And of course, the establishment of knowledge platform Collectieve Kracht. I had the pleasure to speak last year at the opening, and I still have a large green drinking glass with Collectieve Kracht at my office. The platform aims to give citizen collectives and cooperative social enterprises the tools to build a resilient and sustainable future. The platform brings together citizen collectives, but also scientists from the Netherlands, funders, government officials, and network associations working on behalf of citizen collectives. Evidence-based knowledge is thereby very consciously given back to society. It fits very well in the ambition to co-create. After years of work, building the network, researching the needs, finding funds, of course, the platform was launched in February 2022, so 1 year ago. And today's symposium, entitled From Science to Society, Evidence-Based Lessons for Cooperative Social Enterprises, in which a variety of scientists share what their work means for society, is fully connected also to our shared goals of making positive societal impact. To make this positive societal impact, particularly also on an international scale, we need chairs and research programs like this, and also leaders like Professor De Moor. And I have a lot of confidence in how you will fulfill this honorable chair. After an entire day, not being one of the speakers, I think you are very eager to take the floor. So, this is the invitation.
Dear Rector, thank you for your kind introduction. Dear colleagues, dear family and friends, also online, welcome. Let me start today in the same way as I started my PhD defense 20 years ago, with a question. A social dilemma. What does it take to make the choice between your own individual short-term benefit and the collective long-term benefit? And I do so not out of a lack of inspiration or for the sake of history, could be the case. No, I do so because you actually on a daily basis are puzzled and have been puzzled by these social dilemmas more than you realize. And especially in the past few years, it was part and parcel of your daily life, without realizing it maybe, during the COVID period. Shall I take that vaccine? Shall I wear that mask? Shall I invite my friends at home? Some of us even went that extra mile and helped others to make that decision more easily, with lots of initiatives. But most of these initiatives have not survived the COVID period. They were temporary, and what we really need is solutions that keep working, also in the long term, because whether you like it or not, it is our moral duty as citizens to find answers to the challenges ahead of us. Challenges that are grand, complex, wicked, hard to solve. Climate change, loss of biodiversity, mass migration, inequality, to just name a few, and I will not continue in order to not depress you. This is supposed to be a festive event after all, but I would rather look with you at how we can solve those grand challenges. How do all who have a stake in solving those challenges also become part of the solution? And can we all have a share in that solution? Now, when looking for more permanent, long-term solutions for these grand challenges we are currently facing, we tend to point to the responsibilities of governments through national legislation and supranational agreements to change our way of production and consumption. The role of international businesses is being questioned, and to some extent, we do see change there in existing companies. But this is not going fast enough. Although many businesses do have the intention to change, there are many obstacles on the way. There's many motives at play. There's often a huge discrepancy between short-term and long-term objectives, and often a huge gap in between good intentions and effective realizations. Although, this is something wrong. Now, nonetheless, there's a strong belief in our society that entrepreneurial activities, being active on the market, are a way to transform our society towards a more sustainable and equitable society. There's a growing group of enterprises that starts from a completely different viewpoint than the more traditional ones. They have different ambitions. They start from the intention to create positive impact and minimize their negative externalities and put purpose before profit in their business model. The social enterprise. The social enterprise which focuses on sustainability at large in all its dimensions, not just the social side. It is experiencing a rapid growth. Over 80% of the currently active social enterprises in Europe has been founded over the past 20 years. Can those social enterprises be that necessary linking pin between those grand challenges and social dilemmas that we are dealing with? For example, by offering us as consumers a choice. For example, mobile phones that are made out of sustainably sourced raw materials, or chocolate that is produced without slavery, or textile that has been recycled by people with a distance to the regular labor market. These examples that I show are very well known, and the Netherlands are rich in such examples with good intentions that all give us a choice in that supermarket. Such social enterprises are categorized in a recent overview book by colleagues from across Europe as examples of the so-called social business, or an enterprise that combines a shareholder-driven profit motive with the pursuance of a social mission. And do note, the shareholders here are external, mostly. Now, in that same overview work, we also find a type called the public sector social enterprise, or an enterprise that is engaged in services that used to be public, usually initiated by a public body, and sometimes are set up in tandem with third sector partners. We can also find plenty of these in the Netherlands. Think, for example, of these. Organizations that offer trainings and a better employment perspective to youth with physical limitations, that offer equal chances to children, but also offer possibilities to newcomers on the labor market. Now, such social enterprises, there's something wrong here. Now, in that same overview, we also find a type that is actually called the social cooperative. The social cooperative as a form of an organization that combines activities aimed at the interests of the members, mutual interest, with activities aimed at the general interest or a social mission. But where are these in our overview? In the Dutch overview of the social enterprise, we do not find these social cooperatives. These are often left out. So with this lecture, I would like to look with you where we can posit these social cooperatives. Where are they in the overview of social enterprise in the Netherlands? Where can we find them? What kind of impact can they have? What kind of future can they have? And how can we support their development? So let us start with the beginning. There's a growing group of citizens out there, and so I believe also in this aula, that sees the social dilemmas in their lives and that of their neighbors very clearly. These people are individual citizens, but also consumers. Consumers that take that extra step, that go that extra mile because they want to have more control over the production process of what they consume. And they want to have a say in that production process. And they want to do so for a long period of time. Those citizens, they have material needs. But at the same time, they also wonder whether they can obtain what they need in another way, with another form of governance. And they got inspired by what is probably the Dutch, their greatest philosopher. And they realized we cannot do this on our own. We have to do it together. So they decided to tackle their needs together. Through collective action. They form a group around a common need and decide on what it takes to become a member of that group. Usually, this is a combination of a role of investor, who invests in producing what is needed, in combination with a role as consumer, but also sometimes in a role as employee. Those who become involved have a stake in solving the issue, in providing the resource. And as such, they take up the role of prosumers. And by doing so, they combine a role as stakeholder and as shareholder. Now, when this collectivity of members has been formed, then they decide to also create a collectivity of resources. And this can vary substantially. In practice, we see that this particular type of social enterprises focus primarily on providing utilities such as basic utilities such as energy, food, care, basic infrastructure, mobility, housing, but it could also be about labor, insurance, etc. Some examples in the Netherlands show that there is actually a huge variety possible in what you can manage as a collective resource. From elderly care homes and services as in Austerlitz Zorgt, to food from organic food stores that source their groceries locally, to community-supported farms, to energy cooperatives, collective infrastructure cooperatives for fiberglass networks, and mobility as in electric car sharing co-ops. We see many examples of these across the Netherlands. These are just a few. Why produce and own resources collectively if you can also simply go to the shop, you could ask? Well, there's actually a number of reasons. And although Garrett Hardin may disapprove, we know by now that there are many good reasons to create, manage, and use resources collectively, and that this can be done in a durable and a sustainable way. Now, besides the possibilities to share risk, to reduce costs like search cost, information, transaction costs, and creating bargaining positions, there's also what I would call reasons of community economy, the community economy reasons. Community building is often equally important or sometimes even more important for many of these organizations, and for some it's the prime objective. It often goes together with a physical building as a central collective resource, as for example the case in the Wijkpaleis in Rotterdam, which was a few months ago officially bought by the neighborhood and is now a hub for both entrepreneurial activities and community activities. Now, whilst doing so, they support the local economy and take part in that decision-making and take back control over daily resource provision. Taking back control is thereby a matter of choosing for specific resources, not any resources. It can be renewable energy, not just any energy, or organic food, not just any food. In research of Wijnanne van Klingeren in our team, performed with EcoPower, a large Flemish energy cooperative, it became very clear that the ecological motives were the prime movers to become a member of that energy cooperative, more so than financial motives. Taking back control is probably even more significant in the domain of work integration and what I would like to refer to as work facilitation. It is a domain that we most easily connect with the public sector social enterprises or social businesses, but among the cooperative variant, we see a lot of innovative ways to give back voice and power to employees to increase their well-being. From collectives of self-employed, as in the Vrije Uitloop, and SMART, a cooperative for self-employed artists, to even a cleaning cooperative, as Schoon Gewoon, to even a digital variant in the many forms of platform cooperatives that are currently studied by our PhD student, Damian Bunders. However, anyone involved in these initiatives will tell you working together is hard, and I guess all of you have realized that as well. Because in fact, in these cases, in these initiatives, the attempt to solve those bigger societal problems by creating renewable energy, by trying to develop organic farms, you're actually creating a somewhat smaller but still a social dilemma. A social dilemma that again asks you, what do you choose? Yourself, short-term benefit, or the long-term benefit of the smaller community you've just created? Again, a social dilemma. That questions also, who can use that resource? Not all at the same time, I guess. And who has rights, and to how much do you have a right? And this is where collective rules, norms, and values come in. In the academic literature, we refer to this as institution building. And when people build such institutions through collective action, self-governance, self-regulation, we refer to them as institutions for collective action. Mostly these institutions chose the cooperative as a way to consolidate this in a legal sense, as this is a legal form that is best equipped for this. And that is also, of course, where we see the social cooperative model again. Now, we didn't invent this complicated term, institutions for collective action. It seems to haunt me through my career, but we didn't invent this ourselves. We built on the shoulders of giants like Elinor Ostrom and many after her who did research on how these institutions functioned. And they often referred to them also as commons. Now, this term, commons, has become very popular over the past 15 years, more or less. And I must admit, it is a very appealing term. It sounds good. It sounds like the right antidotum to individualism, to selfishness, to maybe exactly what we need is that to tackle those grand challenges, the commons. But in fact, that term, that goes back quite a way in history. It goes back and it refers back to the historical forms of such institutions, and in this case, in particular, to groups of farmers who decided from the late medieval period onwards to use wasteland together as pasture land for all those economic reasons I just mentioned. It was cheaper, it was easier, it was in many economic ways better. In the Netherlands, we've had quite a few of these in the form of meenten and markengenotschappen. And now, centuries later, we see new forms of citizen collectives that call themselves, for example, the Nieuwe Meent, which is a direct reference to that history, and in this case is a co-housing initiative in Amsterdam. But there were more forms of such institutions, not just on the countryside. And in my previous inaugural lecture, which I will not repeat here, I already explained that in the past we've seen several waves of growth of such institutions. First, in that medieval and early modern period, with a top-down solution, with a top-down impact actually from the end of the 18th and early 19th century, leading to their dissolution and their disappearance. However, there was also a second wave. That second wave was taking place in between more or less 1880 and 1920, and we still see the result of that today in the form of, for example, the Rabobank, which originated in that 19th century, boerenleenbanken. Producer cooperatives such as Friesland Campina also originate in that period, and consumer co-ops that we still have today, such as Coop. Now, those examples I showed you earlier on of these different social cooperatives appearing in various sectors, those examples, those could be part of a third wave of institutions for collective action. Maybe we're in the middle of it. In particular, from 2005 onwards, we see this development taking off, way before the crisis, the economic crisis 2008-2009. And we see it in particular in energy and care, but also in many other sectors. And ever since, the growth has not stopped. And it has also taken off in other sectors. And it's quite hard to give exact numbers of this development. There is no reliable inventarization of social enterprises in general, nor is there one of this particular type. There are, however, per sector, some data that give us some idea. For example, as of the energy sector. Recently, actually earlier this week, published Monitor by Hier Opgewekt, an organization that unites these energy cooperatives, shows that over 700 energy cooperatives across the Netherlands have developed over the past few years, and somewhere in between 300 and 1,500 care communities. And that's a wide stretch. We don't exactly know how large this is, but it is a topic that PhD student Kevin Wittenberg is currently working on as part of the Scoop program, and I'm sure he will tell us what we should conclude. Now, there's other ways also to look into the spread of these organizations. For example, the numbers of the National Cooperative Councils. There's indications there that the growth of registration of new cooperatives has, in fact, also accelerated over the past few years. On the basis of those numbers of the National Cooperative Council, whereby so-called pseudo-cooperatives, which did not follow the cooperative principles, on the basis of those that were unidentified and left out, a growth of more than 30% in the registration of new co-ops was seen since 2016. In particular in services, energy and care. Now, a substantial number of these can be considered as cooperative social enterprises. But we don't have those numbers, but nevertheless, there's other ways to find out how much this movement is growing. There's more indirect indicators that show that indeed it has been growing and has been speeding up. After a lot of experimentation across the Netherlands, there's now room for a certain degree of standardization. In several sectors, we see a spread of a specific model that has been thought of by a group of people and has been experimented with over time. They distribute this model and they help people in other settings across the Netherlands to adapt the model locally to the local conditions. We see this, for example, in the case of care. The Knarrenhof is a model that has spread over the Netherlands and is very popular as a form of elderly care housing. And such a, what we could call franchising model is also to be found in the food sector, among food collectives, as for example the case of a very popular model of the Herenboeren. However, one of the older forms, that goes back to 2011, is that of a new mutual, a new form of mutual for the self-employed, the broodfondsen. And those have spread over the Netherlands and already have 30,000 self-employed as their members. So the model does seem to spread further, but growth of membership in such institutions for collective action is not a straightforward thing. There's good reasons for such organizations to be careful about having too many members per organization. To start with, many of those institutions of collective action build on trust to avoid free riding, which means that frequent meetings and social control are key elements to keep going in the long term. With membership growth, there's also a risk of growing bureaucracy and diverging expectations between the original members and those who joined later on. More members also demand additional resources and thus new investments. How do you keep those two in balance? Is there a solution to avoid all of this and nevertheless grow as a movement and increase your impact as a new form of governance? How can you scale such organizations without losing their identity and jeopardizing their internal decision-making processes, which are, on the whole, mostly quite democratic? This and other questions are central to our NWO Vici project called Unica, in which we intend to build a unified theory for the development of institutions for collective action in the past millennium. And from that we can learn what works and what does not work in terms of scaling strategies. So let me take you there again. If we go back to that first wave I mentioned, we can say that although that wave managed pretty well, it went on for quite a long time, in the end, their way of scaling was not without risks. In those times, these institutions such as commons, guilds, they actually preferred to stay small. To stay small, and whenever they became larger, got more members, they split it often in more specialized units. Now, the advantage of this was that there is a possibility to stay close to the needs of the members. You know what your members want, you can act upon that. But you can also diversify your collective services more easily, and that to a relatively homogeneous group of members. At the same time, this scaling strategy made these organizations back then very vulnerable to external shocks. And this in the end also led to the end of the big first wave, when governments decided that this was not an institution for the future development of their countries. Now in the second wave, we basically see the opposite taking place, strangely enough. See the example, for example, of the company I mentioned earlier, Friesland Campina, an agricultural cooperative which started in 1871 with 9 farmers. They set up a cheese cooperative. But in between then and today, they merged several times with other companies. And now that results in a cooperative with over 18,000 shareholders, producers. That's a very large cooperative. Such a merger strategy was quite typical for similar institutions in the second wave and had the advantage of providing strength and critical mass, but often turned out to be problematic for the internal cohesion and decision-making process. Now, what is happening today is in fact quite peculiar. It's in fact the best of two worlds, or maybe we could say the best of two waves. If you like, instead of staying small and vulnerable for external interventions, what they do is follow a network strategy. In academia, that is also known as polycentricity, or a complex form of governance, not governments, governance, with multiple centers of decision-making, each of which operates with some degree of autonomy. Now, networks such as Nederland Zorgt voor elkaar, Energie Samen or Landsco, they have the advantage that their member organizations can keep focusing on the needs of their members, while their network is responsible for managing tensions with other organizations like local and national governments. Now, the disadvantage of such sectoral networks is that opportunities such as offering more diverse services to members are often overlooked because they very much concentrate on their own sector. Looking into the opportunities of changing this is exactly what we intend to do within our part of the CENTIS project, together with colleagues from Utrecht and Eindhoven University and many societal stakeholders. We intend to investigate whether this disadvantage can also be tackled from the bottom up. From historical studies, we know that institutions for collective action over time often develop several different services, amongst others, to bind their members more closely to the organization. And gradually, they often become what we would call multi-purpose organizations. Now, within CENTIS, we study what the chances are in the care and energy sector to increase the resilience of these organizations when they combine different collective goods and services. Diversifying your services is probably good for your members, to connect them to your organization, to offer them more benefits, to, in the long run, make your organization resilient. But the way to have the most impact on society as a whole is to scale up the norms and the values behind these organizations. And these differ quite substantially from a regular enterprise. Values such as reciprocity, solidarity, sufficiency are absolutely central to these organizations, their function, and they are necessary to make sure that the organization runs, that they can focus on what they need to do for their members in terms of utility, of social equity, and efficiency. However, are these also beneficial to society at large? It is where these organizations could become most impactful, where their impact might be greatest. But we have to study this. And together with colleagues from the UK, we intend to study how transformative the cooperative as a business model can be. The cooperative principles show very good intentions, but do these also lead to better and more impactful organizations? All in all, we need to study and weigh the advantages of more institutions for collective action versus the potential risks it brings. There are studies that show that such organizations are more resilient as businesses, better capable of dealing with crises and problems in general. There are on the individual level also indications that there might be positive effects on well-being of those with a higher control and ownership over the work they do or the resources they need. And there's also indications in academic literature of what we would call a spillover effect in terms of pro-social behavior, whereby being part of a worker cooperative, for example, may lead to employees that are also outside of their work situation more active in being a volunteer, for example, or take part in politics. And possibly, we don't know, we've got to study this, being part of an energy cooperative or an organic farm cooperative can also lead to more sustainable citizenship. There's good reasons to involve citizens for sure in resource management and use, to make them aware of the challenges ahead of us. It may have a multitude of positive effects on creating new opportunities to tackle the current global challenges. It may help to form more solid financial bases when these prosumers actually chip in. It might also help to increase support for new technologies like windmills, or to bring those grand challenges to local communities. But at the same time, I think we should also not be blind for possible negative side effects, such as what we called rebound effects, moral licensing effects, and nor should we forget that being part of an organization or a cooperative demands the financial risks of its members, of its citizens when they invest in these organizations. The financial risk is really important to talk about. There is, after all, for the whole sector of social enterprise, a need for a better understanding of what is needed in terms of financial support and how investors can contribute to this. And this is a study domain of PhD student Caroline Heitman in our research team. It's known that currently 3/4 of social enterprises need external financing to be financially sustainable, and that these needs vary throughout their life cycle. At the same time, a recent survey has shown that insufficient supply of financing options remains one of the biggest barriers for social enterprises, but there is also growing external financing available for social enterprises through more investors, more types of capital, and more instruments. But on the other hand, investors claim again that there is insufficient demand for these instruments of financing. So clearly, there's some sort of mismatch going on here between supply and demand of financing for social enterprises. And this calls for more trust in the capacities of social enterprises on the one hand, on the side of the investors, but probably also for more efforts from social enterprises to show their achievements and how these evolve over their lifetime. Now, whether or not those institutions for collective action can become and will be a part of a transformative force in our society in the future, that depends on a number of factors, not just on those entrepreneurial citizens themselves. Many other parties can play a significant role in this. Governments, to start with. They have a tendency to consider such institutions for collective action rather as a form of citizen participation, similar to other forms that we see popping up across Europe, forms like citizens' assemblies or G1000s. I would like to argue that these collectivities of citizens should not be seen as forms of citizen participation. They are very much on the outside of it, but they should be seen as institutions in their own right, run by entrepreneurial citizens who are often providing a service that is no longer provided by the government. So how can they be participating? Governments can give recognition to these organizations as a form of social enterprise through, to start with, systematic inventorization and mapping of all social enterprises, the whole breadth of it. They should consider the role of networks of these organizations because they might have the tools in hand to deal with the historically low trust in the government today. They can be a linking pin also between the government and the citizen. At the same time, a more complete view of the social enterprise and all its variants would also mean that the current initiative to give additional legal backing to social enterprises in the form of the BV maatschappelijk needs to be reconsidered, building on a more institutional, diverse and more complete picture of all social enterprises, as we have argued recently in various articles. It is in that sense quite remarkable that in some countries across Europe, such as, for example, Belgium, the social enterprise is, in its commercial law, only possible in the cooperative format. If you want to be a social enterprise, you need to be a cooperative. Whereas in the Netherlands, the cooperative format is, on the other hand, often overlooked in the social enterprise context. As scientists, I believe we can also contribute to the visibility of both social enterprises and their results, without losing our neutral position or jeopardizing it. I believe we can play a vital role in improving the exchange of the knowledge about the functioning of these organizations between all parties involved, all stakeholders involved. Our recently set up platform Collectieve Kracht, which was also described by our director, is supported by many members from citizen collectives, civil servants, financial organizations, network organizations, and scientists, and they work together on related issues that have a real impact and relevance for today. After many years of dreaming of such a platform, we could finally launch it last year. I was very happy we finally got a real result, a platform, and we now also have a great team put together, led by coordinator Lucas Held, who can take it several steps forward. So keep an eye on Collectieve Kracht, because lots is going to happen there. As researchers, we try to do our bit to explore the ways in which new governance forms and business models can contribute to societal change. What makes the approach of our research group, in all modesty, unique, I think, is the linking of academic research on social enterprises through the organizational lens of the commons and institutions for collective action, in combination with academic expertise on alternative business models such as in cooperative. It is that combination of insights, I think, that will bring us further. And why we do so by building on longitudinal research that looks at past developments, and we will not always go a millennium back in time, but also enriched by the knowledge and experience of practitioners. That transdisciplinary research is really at the heart of what we do. As a research group, we now, above all, I think we need to study these social enterprises in their full breadth, in all their variants. We look into what makes these organizations resilient and what makes them more impactful. But we also want to understand in what ways they can be vehicles for change. Change that we all need to endeavor. We will need all the models of social enterprises to come up with sufficient solutions for the current challenges that we're facing. And we need to know what can make them more resilient, these are solutions. But above all, I think we too, researchers, we remain citizens. We too have a stake in creating alternatives. Alternatives to which we can contribute both as stakeholders and shareholders and create that community economy, because I do believe that all of us have a choice. Or as one of my favorite colleagues would say, man is not made by his abilities, but by the choices he makes. And indeed, I have made myself a number of choices. One about 20 years ago to relocate professionally to the Netherlands, and 2 years ago from Utrecht to Rotterdam. I have not regretted any of those choices, although both were and are not always the easiest ones, I must say. My father, unfortunately, is no longer with us, but my mother here can confirm that as a toddler, I already had an explicit preference for orange things. So that I chose the Netherlands for my professional life, that was a natural choice. It should not surprise. But the move I made more recently maybe does demand a bit of an explanation. But it's in fact very easy, at least for most of you in the room. At some point, there's something like a midlife crisis, right? So you're on the brink of buying that motorcycle, but then all of a sudden you get the possibility to join a management school. So you have a choice. And for those who know me, it will be no surprise that I went for the riskier option. No, seriously, I mean, the truth is actually that the change from a chair entitled Institutions for Collective Action in Historical Perspective to a chair on social enterprises and institutions for collective action has in fact nothing to do with my midlife crisis, but everything with the many societal crises that we are in. And the best description of why I had to move to RSM was given to me afterwards, actually, by someone from an energy cooperative who said, well, maybe, finally, if you move, we will be taken serious as an alternative form of governance. If you have listened carefully to my lecture just now, then you will realize we are working on it. And I think it's appropriate to start this word of thanks here by addressing those active, brave, stubborn, and entrepreneurial citizens who are well represented here in the aula, for their continuous inspiration and for joining me on my quest for what I like to call the holy grail of cooperation. Similarly, there's many societal organizations that believe in the transformative power of the social enterprises and have decided to support the work of our team. I would like to thank the Social Impact Fund of the ABN AMRO, in particular Erik Bukens and Mark Hillen, for their contribution to the establishment of the chair. Our research and platform received also generous support from Stichting Doen, the program Duurzaam Door from the Rijksdienst voor Ondernemend Nederland, Stichting Goede Grutten, the Dutch Science Foundation of course, NWO, the Erasmus Trust Fund, and our very own Erasmus Research School. The formation of the chair itself benefited greatly from input from both scientists, experts in the field, and practitioners, also experts in the field. And I'm grateful for the support of this wonderful group of enthusiasts in the further development of the activities of the chair. With many of you, I have been for years sometimes on the road in the past, be it by discussing the future of care with Jan, or studying cooperatives together with Koen, or looking into the possibilities of the community economy. And I'm very much looking forward to continue those journeys. From one university to another, from one discipline to another, from history to management, it's quite a ride indeed, even without a motorcycle. But I did not travel alone. The true value of working in a team became really clearer to me during the COVID period. In a rather individualistic and often competitive world as academia, in a team there are always shoulders to lean on. I should thank team members who joined me on that journey so far, of whom some, in the meanwhile, chose a different path again. But then, miraculously, we're joined again by new enthusiastic colleagues, who all contribute to making our knowledge base stronger, and the plans we make all the more exciting. We know the theory of cooperation, but we also know how hard it can be in reality. And this amazing group of beautiful people that you are, from interns to postdocs to volunteer researchers, you make it all a lot easier to practice what we preach. Thank you, Veronique, Damian, Caroline, Marianne, Fernanda, Arthur, Lucas, Benjamin, Maaike, Ife, Grant, Shreya, Peter, and Tom. What you have heard today is only part of the work these great people do and the plans we have. And what you've seen, some of you, earlier on this afternoon, is what they're capable of putting together. The far more elaborate and extensive text of this talk, with footnotes, that will be made available before long, and you will receive a message about that. Now, the plans we have with that research team, they could not have fitted anywhere better than at the Business Society Management Department. Rob van Tulder, is somewhere out there. I wasn't there yet, but with your creativity, enthusiasm, and ambition, and no doubt also a serious dose of stubbornness, you laid 25 years ago the foundations of a great department. And I'm not the only one grateful for that. I have truly enjoyed our discussions and cooperation so far, which were, I think, a play of both principles and pragmatics in the preparation of this chair. And they were enriched with ideas from colleagues, amongst others, Lucas Mees. Thanks also to our head of department, Marius van Dijken, for the open leadership style and the many discussions we had so far. These really have made a huge difference for me in the onboarding process for RSM. Thank you. And Thomas Bouwens, I hope that together we can strengthen the knowledge base at RSM with the many interests we share. And this, I think, is also the place to thank those people who often literally remain invisible, but who make RSM go round. From our own secretaries, Janneke and Yolanda, to support staff in IT, HR, grant support, and so much more, you realize that you make all the difference for us clumsy researchers. But what binds you as an academic is, however, not just the place or the department you belong to, but maybe even more so, the academic community you connect to. I have for many years had many colleagues and friends in the International Association for the Study of the Commons, in the International Cooperative Alliance research community, in the AMES network, and I'm looking forward to continue working with you all, amongst others, next academic year in the fall with Florian Grisel and Dustin Garrick at Oxford University. I'm also particularly actually grateful to those colleagues, experts in the field, that earlier on today contributed to our symposium, showing very clearly that there are so many colleagues far more interesting than me to listen to. Thank you. And of course, to my family and friends. Thank you for not just being here, but anywhere, anytime. We need each other. And also for not talking to me about commons, cooperatives, and social enterprise, or any of the like when we are together. You do seem to realize that I get enough of that elsewhere. Now, there's two special people here I have made the journey with, although not always physically by my side. The professional life I have chosen is not always an easy one for Hans and Kaat, but we manage very well, and we thrive together. I'm proud of us. And every time when I arrive at Rotterdam Central Station, the great Desiderius Erasmus gives me comfort with his soothing words. Ruimte scheidt de lichamen, niet de geesten. Ik heb gezegd.